They bound him in the center of the camp as the sun climbed toward noon. Wesley Harlan's wrists burned against the rough rope, his knees pressed into the dry earth beneath him. Faces he'd traded with for months now watched with cold judgment. He couldn't understand why they had dragged him here, couldn't piece together what he had done to deserve this. The accusations had been hurled in Apache words he only half understood. Something about sacred ground, about theft, about betrayal. His mind raced through the previous day's activities. He'd been miles away tending to the Maxwell family's youngest child who had fallen ill with fever. There were at least a dozen witnesses who could confirm his whereabouts. Yet here he knelt, bound and judged by people whose trust he had spent months earning. Wesley raised his head, meeting the implacable gaze of Victor Blackwood. The Apache war chief stood before him, his weathered face carved with lines of anger and vindication. Victor's eyes held no mercy, only the cold satisfaction of a man who had finally trapped his prey. Behind Victor stood the tribal council, 7 elders whose collective wisdom guided the tribe. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed resigned. None appeared willing to challenge Victor's authority. The crowd parted suddenly, and a cry cut through the heavy silence. "Stop!" Wesley's heart lurched painfully in his chest. He knew that voice, had spent countless stolen hours listening to it explain the medicinal properties of desert plants, the history of her people, the dreams she held close. Sierra pushed through the gathering, her obsidian hair falling loose from its usual careful braids. Her dark eyes, usually so measured and calm, now burned with desperation and fear. "Stop this!" she cried again, first in English, then repeating it in Apache. She moved to stand between Wesley and her uncle, her slender frame somehow filling the space with defiance. Victor's expression darkened. "Step aside," he commanded in English, his voice low and dangerous. "This does not concern you." "It concerns me more than anyone," Sierra replied, her voice trembling but strong. She drew herself up, looking around at the faces of her people, friends, family, those she had known her entire life. In that moment, Wesley saw her gather her courage like a physical thing, wrapping it around herself before she spoke the words that would change everything. "He's my husband." The camp fell into a silence so complete that Wesley could hear his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Sierra stood trembling, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths, her declaration still hanging in the air like smoke. She'd just shattered the carefully built wall between their two worlds, the secret they'd protected for 8 months. Victor recovered first, his laugh sharp and bitter. "Impossible. You would never betray your people this way." Sierra reached beneath her dress, pulling out a simple leather cord from which hung a silver ring. "We were married by a priest in the settlement of River's Bend 8 months ago." She turned, meeting the eyes of the elders one by one. "I have never betrayed our people. I have tried to build a bridge between our world and theirs, just as my father wished." At the mention of her father, Victor's face contorted with rage. "Maka was a fool whose trust in the white man cost him his life, and now you dishonor his memory with this abomination." Wesley strained against his bonds. "Don't speak to her that way," he growled, earning himself a sharp kick from one of Victor's warriors. Sierra knelt beside Wesley, her hand hovering near his face but not touching him, aware of the watching eyes. "Are you hurt?" she whispered. "I'm fine," he answered, his eyes searching hers. "But you shouldn't have—" "Silence!" Victor commanded. He seized Sierra's arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. "You have lost the right to speak in defense of this man. You have betrayed your father's memory, betrayed every teaching he gave you." He looked back at Wesley, and for the first time, a cold smile touched his lips. "The tribe will decide his fate, and yours." 2 younger warriors moved to flank Sierra, not touching her, but making it clear she would not be allowed to interfere. She looked at Wesley, her eyes filled with a terror that matched his own. What had they done? Who had seen him yesterday? He'd been nowhere near the Western Ridge, the sacred burial ground. He'd been treating the Maxwell child miles away, with a dozen settlers who could confirm it. But as Victor turned to address the tribe in rapid Apache, gesturing toward Wesley and then toward Sierra, Wesley realized with sickening clarity that the truth might not matter at all. This was about more than accusations of trespass. This was about control, about fear, about a man determined to protect his people the only way he knew how, by cutting them off from the outside world. Victor's voice carried across the camp, each word an Apache landing like a stone thrown into still water. Wesley couldn't understand most of it, but he recognized certain words: betrayal, corruption, theft. The crowd's expression shifted from shock to anger, from confusion to hardened judgment. Sierra struggled against the invisible barrier the two warriors created around her, her voice rising in desperate appeals that Victor simply talked over. Then an elderly woman stepped forward, her face weathered by decades under the sun. Wesley recognized her as Edsilla, one of the most respected medicine women in the tribe. She spoke directly to Victor, her tone sharp and questioning. Victor responded with smooth confidence, gesturing toward the western ridge, then toward Wesley. Edzilla's eyes narrowed, but she nodded slowly and stepped back into the crowd. The sun beat down on Wesley's exposed neck. Sweat trickled down his spine. His mind raced through the previous day. He'd spent the entire afternoon at the Maxwell homestead, working to bring down little Sarah's fever. At least 8 people had seen him there from noon until sunset. He'd never gone anywhere near the western ridge. Someone had lied. Someone had deliberately placed him at that location. But who would benefit from destroying him? The answer stood right in front of him, addressing the tribe with practiced authority. Victor Blackwood had never hidden his disapproval of the trading relationship between the settlement and the Apache community. He'd argued against it in council meetings, Sierra had told him. Victor believed contact with outsiders weakened traditional ways, that allowing traders into their territory was the first step toward losing everything that mattered. And now Victor had the perfect opportunity to prove his point, by making an example of the one trader who'd committed the ultimate transgression. The council began to disperse, moving toward the central lodge where they would deliberate. Victor's final words to the gathered tribe carried clearly over the murmuring crowd. The council will determine this man's punishment before sunset. As the crowd thinned, a young Apache woman approached Victor. Wesley recognized Elizabeth, Victor's daughter. Unlike her father, she wore her hair in a style that combined traditional Apache elements with influences from the settlement. She spoke quietly to Victor, who shook his head firmly in response. Wesley couldn't hear their words, but the tension between father and daughter was unmistakable. Elizabeth cast a brief glance in Wesley's direction before disappearing into one of the nearby dwellings. There was something in that look, not quite sympathy, but something close to regret. The hours crawled by. Wesley remained bound in the center of the camp, the sun climbing higher, the heat becoming oppressive. His throat burned with thirst. His shoulders ached from the position they'd forced him into. But worse than the physical pain was the helplessness, the knowledge that somewhere in this camp, Sierra was being held away from him, probably terrified, and he couldn't do anything to reach her. As afternoon turned the shadows long, a figure approached from behind. Wesley tensed, expecting another confrontation, but the voice that spoke was young and uncertain. "They're keeping her in her father's dwelling." Wesley turned his head as much as the ropes allowed. Elizabeth stood a few paces away, a water skin in her hands. She glanced around furtively before approaching closer. "Drink," she said, holding the water skin to his lips. Wesley drank deeply, the cool water bringing immediate relief to his parched throat. When he'd finished, Elizabeth knelt beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father has known about your marriage for 3 days," she said, her dark eyes meeting his. "Someone told him. I don't know who." Wesley's mind raced. 3 days. The timeline clicked into place. Someone had told Victor about the marriage 3 days ago, giving him time to arrange this elaborate trap. Time to find people willing to lie. Time to make it look like justice rather than revenge. "The witnesses who claimed to see me at the Western Ridge, they're lying," Wesley said urgently. "I was at the Maxwell homestead all yesterday afternoon. I can prove it." "The witnesses are Nahele, Dakota, and Aponi," Elizabeth replied. "Nahele is Sierra's cousin. He once asked for her hand before you came. My father gave them what they wanted in exchange for their testimony." "Which was?" Elizabeth looked away. "For Nahele, a place on the Warrior Council. For the others, I don't know. But it wasn't truth they were selling." "Why are you telling me this?" Wesley asked, studying her face. Wesley drank deeply, the cool water bringing immediate relief to his parched throat. When he'd finished, Elizabeth knelt beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father has known about your marriage for 3 days," she said, her dark eyes meeting his. "Someone told him. I don't know who." Wesley's mind raced. 3 days. The timeline clicked into place. Someone had told Victor about the marriage 3 days ago, giving him time to arrange this elaborate trap. Time to find people willing to lie. Time to make it look like justice rather than revenge. "The witnesses who claimed to see me at the Western Ridge, they're lying," Wesley said urgently. "I was at the Maxwell homestead all yesterday afternoon. I can prove it." "The witnesses are Nahele, Dakota, and Aponi," Elizabeth replied. "Nahele is Sierra's cousin. He once asked for her hand before you came. My father gave them what they wanted in exchange for their testimony." "Which was?" Elizabeth looked away. "For Nahele, a place on the Warrior Council. For the others, I don't know. But it wasn't truth they were selling." She hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "There's more. My father isn't acting alone in this. Judge Hammond from the Territorial Court visited our camp 2 weeks ago. They spoke for hours in private." Wesley felt a chill run through him. Judge Elijah Hammond had a reputation throughout the territory, a man who dispensed frontier justice with an iron hand, particularly harsh when it came to matters involving Native peoples. "Hammond?" Wesley pressed. "What would a territorial judge want with your father?" "I don't know exactly," Elizabeth admitted, "but I overheard Hammond talking about clearing obstacles and progress that cannot be stopped. The day after he left, my father began speaking more forcefully against you and other traitors." She leaned closer. "Judge Hammond returned to the settlement yesterday. Some say he's gathering men, settlers with grievances against the Apache." The implications were clear. This wasn't just about Wesley's marriage to Sierra or Victor's wounded pride. Larger forces were at work. Powerful men with territorial ambitions who would see the Apache as nothing more than an inconvenient barrier to their plans. "Why are you telling me this?" Wesley asked, studying her face. "Because what my father is doing dishonors us all." She rose, stepping back. "And because Sierra saved my life last winter, when the fever came. I haven't forgotten. Because what my father is doing dishonors us all." She rose, stepping back. "And because Sierra saved my life last winter, when the fever came. I haven't forgotten." Before Wesley could respond, a shout came from across the camp. Elizabeth quickly retreated as several warriors approached. They untied Wesley from the post but kept his hands bound behind him. Without explanation, they marched him toward the council lodge. Inside, the air was cool and dim, scented with sage and cedar. The 7 elders sat in a semicircle, Victor standing to address them. Sierra was nowhere to be seen. Wesley was forced to kneel once more, his guards taking position behind him. Victor turned to face him, speaking in English for the council's benefit. "Wesley Harlan, you stand accused of trespassing on sacred ground and stealing medicinal herbs that were placed as offerings to our ancestors. 3 witnesses saw you near the Western Ridge yesterday at sunset. Do you deny these accusations?" "I do deny them," Wesley said firmly, his voice carrying in the quiet space. "I was at the Maxwell homestead from noon until after sunset yesterday, treating their youngest child for fever. At least 8 people can confirm my whereabouts." Murmurs ran through the council. Victor's jaw tightened. "Convenient that your only witnesses are your own kind, who would lie to protect you. Just as convenient that your witnesses are those who benefit from my destruction," Wesley countered, his eyes never leaving Victor's. Victor stepped closer, his voice lowering dangerously. "You have corrupted my niece, turned her against her people, made her forget who she is. That alone deserves punishment." "I have never asked Sierra to be anything other than who she is," Wesley replied. "She honors her people in everything she does." "Enough!" Victor turned back to the council. "We have heard the testimony. We have heard his denial. It is time to decide his fate." The eldest of the council, a man with silver hair and deep-set eyes, raised his hand. "We will deliberate. Take him outside." As the warriors pulled Wesley to his feet, the council lodge door opened. Sierra stood framed in the entrance, her face pale but determined. Behind her stood Adsila, the medicine woman. "We invoke the right of challenge," Itzila announced. her voice surprisingly strong for one so aged. The council stilled. Victor turned slowly, his expression incredulous. What did you say? We invoke the right of challenge for this man, Adsila repeated, stepping forward to stand beside Sierra. An ancient law, but one never removed from our ways. When someone is accused and claims innocence, they may be tested 3 times to prove their character and their understanding of our world. Victor laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet lodge. That law hasn't been used in half a century. But it remains our law, the silver-haired elder said thoughtfully. If properly invoked by a member of the tribe, we must honor it. She has no right to invoke anything, Victor snapped, pointing at Sierra. She has betrayed us. I am not the one invoking it, Sierra said calmly. Her eyes found Wesley's, and in them he saw not just love, but a fierce determination that steadied his racing heart. Adsila is. All eyes turned to the medicine woman, who stood straight and dignified despite her years. I invoke the right of challenge, she confirmed, as is my right as an elder of this tribe. The council members exchanged glances. Finally, the silver-haired elder nodded slowly. The right of challenge has been properly invoked. We must honor our ways. Victor's face darkened with fury, but he controlled himself with visible effort. Fine, he said tightly, 3 challenges. But when he fails, and he will fail, his punishment will be even more severe for having wasted our time. If he passes the challenges, he will be declared innocent of all accusations, Adsila reminded everyone, and free to leave or stay as he chooses. He will not pass, Victor said with cold certainty. He turned to Wesley, his eyes glittering with malice. The first challenge begins now. You will identify and explain the significance of 5 sacred boundary markers around our territory before sunset. If you cannot, you've proven you don't even understand what you've been walking through all these months. The warriors cut the ropes binding Wesley's wrists. Blood rushed back into his hands, bringing sharp pins of pain. Someone gave him water, which he drank gratefully. Sierra stepped toward him, but Victor blocked her path. You cannot help him, he warned. If you try, the challenge is forfeit, and he will be judged guilty immediately. The law allows for guidance, Adsila interjected, not help with completing the tasks, but context for what is expected. Victor scowled but stepped aside. Sierra approached Wesley, her eyes searching his face. 5 boundary markers, she explained quietly. Natural formations that our people have recognized as sacred for generations. You need to find them and explain why each one matters. Her voice dropped even lower. Remember our walks, Wesley. Remember what I taught you. A warrior pulled her away before she could say more. Wesley was led to the edge of the camp, where 2 silent escorts waited to accompany him on his task. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. He had perhaps 2 hours before sunset. As he set out, Victor's voice followed him. When you fail, outsider, you will wish we had simply killed you today. Wesley moved through the scrubland with his 2 escorts trailing behind, their faces impassive. The sun hung lower now, casting long shadows that seemed to count down the minutes he had left. His mind worked frantically through fragments of memory, conversations with Sierra beside the river, stories she'd told him while they lay hidden in a cave during a summer storm, lessons about her people that he'd tried to absorb even as he'd been distracted by the curve of her smile. The boundary markers. Sierra had talked about them once, explaining how her people understood the land through significant natural formations. Not mere landmarks for navigation, but places where the spiritual and physical worlds touched, where the ancestors still spoke to the living. The first marker came to him almost by accident. He'd been walking east when he noticed an outcropping of red stone that looked like it had been carved by wind into the shape of a hand reaching skyward. Something about it triggered a memory, Sierra pointing to a similar formation in the distance, telling him it represented the gesture of offering the way her ancestors had lifted prayers to the sky. Here, Wesley said, stopping before the stone formation. His escorts waited. This is a marker, the stone shaped like a raised hand. It represents the act of offering, of giving thanks for the land and water that sustains life. He touched the rough surface. Your people see it as a reminder that everything taken from the earth should be acknowledged and honored. One escort nodded slightly. Not confirmation exactly, but not rejection either. They continued walking. The second marker proved harder to find. Time slipped away as Wesley searched, his panic growing with each passing minute. Then he remembered Sierra talking about water, how natural springs were always sacred, how her people believed water that came from deep earth carried the memory of ancestors. He changed direction, heading toward the sound of running water he had heard earlier. There, a spring bubbled up between rocks, feeding a small pool surrounded by smooth stones that had clearly been placed deliberately. Someone had arranged them in a circle. Water source, Wesley said, his throat tight with relief. Springs are sacred because they connect the surface world to what lies beneath. The stones around it mark it as a place of reverence where offerings are left and prayers are spoken for continued abundance. Again, a slight nod. 3 more to find, and the sun was sliding toward the horizon with merciless speed. The third marker almost made Wesley laugh, not from humor, but from the sharp relief of recognition. A tree grew alone on a small rise, its trunk split by lightning years ago but still alive, both halves reaching toward the sky in a twisted embrace. Sierra had called trees like this broken but breathing, symbols of survival through catastrophe. This tree, Wesley said, approaching it, split by lightning but still living. It represents resilience, the ability to endure damage and continue growing. It's sacred because it proves that destruction doesn't have to mean death. The escorts exchanged glances. Wesley's heart hammered. 2 more, maybe 20 minutes of light left. He found the fourth marker by following a path worn into the earth, not by humans, but by animals. It led to a salt lick, a place where deer and other creatures came to feed on mineral deposits in the exposed rock. Sierra had explained these places once, how they were considered gifts from the earth, how taking game near them was forbidden because the animals came here in trust. Salt lick, Wesley said, breathing hard now from the quick pace. Sacred because animals come here without fear, and hunting near these places violates the trust between hunter and hunted. It's about honor and balance. 4 down, 1 more. The sun touched the distant hills, painting everything in shades of orange and red. Wesley had maybe 10 minutes. Think, what had Sierra taught him? What other markers had she mentioned? Then it hit him. Something she'd said about places where different types of stone met, where the earth showed its layers like pages in a book. She called them teaching stones because they revealed time itself, showing how the world had been built over countless years. He ran now, despite his exhausted legs, searching for the kind of exposed cliff face that would show stratified rock. The escorts jogged behind him, not helping but not hindering either. And there, just as the sun's lower edge kissed the horizon, a small canyon where erosion had carved away the soil, revealing bands of different colored stones stacked like a wall built by ancient hands. Teaching stones, Wesley gasped, reaching them just as shadows began to stretch across the land, where the earth shows its age in layers, sacred because they remind us that we're just one small moment in a much longer story. They teach humility. He turned to face his escorts, his chest heaving. Behind them, the rest of the council had followed at a distance. Sierra stood among them, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting to hold back. Victor stepped forward, his face unreadable in the fading light. 5 markers, he said slowly, identified and explained. He looked at Wesley with something that might have been surprise or might have been deeper resentment. You passed the first test. The way he said it made clear that the hardest challenges still lay ahead. Night settled over the camp, and with it came a cold that seeped into Wesley's bones. They'd given him food and water, allowed him to rest near a fire, but the ropes were back around his wrists, looser this time but still there, a reminder that passing one test didn't mean freedom. Sierra sat across the fire from him, finally permitted to be near him now that the first challenge had concluded. Between them sat 3 council members, ensuring they couldn't speak privately. But at least Wesley could see her face, could draw strength from the fact that she was still fighting. Victor emerged from the darkness, his expression grim. The second task will begin at first light, he announced. You will face the council and answer questions about our history, our laws, and our relationship with this land. If you cannot demonstrate true understanding, Not just memorize facts, but genuine comprehension of what these things mean to us, you will fail. Wesley felt his stomach tighten. Memorizing facts he could handle, but proving he understood the deeper meaning, the emotional and spiritual significance of Apache culture, that was something else entirely. How many questions? Sierra asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. As many as the council deems necessary, Victor replied, looking at her. Until they are satisfied that he either understands or doesn't. He paused. You will not be allowed to help him this time. No guidance, no context. He answers alone. After Victor left, Atsila spoke quietly from where she sat near the edge of the circle. You should rest while you can. Tomorrow will be difficult. But Wesley couldn't rest. His mind raced through everything Sierra had ever told him about her people. Stories about ancestors who had survived impossible winters. Explanations of why certain animals were never hunted. Descriptions of seasonal ceremonies and what they represented. He'd absorbed so much during their time together. But had he truly understood it? Across the fire, Sierra's eyes met his. She couldn't speak to him, couldn't offer advice, but she could look at him. And in that gaze, Wesley saw something that steadied his racing thoughts. She believed in him. She believed he'd listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart. As the night grew deeper, the camp quieted. The council members watching over them relaxed slightly, their attention wavering. Sierra seized the moment, her fingers working at the leather cord around her neck. With a subtle movement, she slid her wedding ring onto her finger, a silent gesture of defiance and commitment that only Wesley noticed. He responded by straightening his posture, raising his chin slightly. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together even if they stood apart. The night crawled by. Wesley dozed fitfully, waking to the sound of movement. As the camp began to stir before dawn, warriors brought him to the center of the gathering place. As the first gray light touched the eastern sky, the entire tribe assembled, forming a circle around him. This wasn't just a test anymore. It was a public examination of whether an outsider could ever truly understand their world. The council sat before him, 7 faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all waiting to judge whether the love between him and Sierra was built on genuine respect or on ignorance and desire alone. Adsila spoke first, her voice carrying across the quiet morning. Tell us why we do not hunt near water sources during the dry season. Wesley took a breath. This was about more than conservation, more than simple practicality. Because in times of scarcity, water becomes sacred ground where all living things must come to survive. To hunt there would be to violate the trust of the land itself, to take advantage of desperation. It's about honoring that even when you're hungry, some things matter more than your immediate need. Several council members nodded slightly. The questions continued. Why do we leave offerings at the teaching stones? To acknowledge that knowledge has a cost, that understanding the world requires humility and gratitude for those who came before and learned through their own struggles. Why must certain stories only be told in winter? Wesley hesitated on this one, searching his memory. Sierra had explained it once, something about seasons and listening. Because winter is when the land rests and people gather close. Stories told in winter are heard differently, with full attention, without the distraction of work and survival. They're meant to be absorbed deeply, not just heard in passing. The questions came faster now, probing deeper. What does it mean to say someone walks between worlds? It means they understand more than one way of seeing, more than one way of being, Wesley answered, thinking of Sierra, of himself. But it also means they may never fully belong to either world. They pay a price for that understanding. Sierra's eyes glistened in the growing light. She knew he was talking about her, about them both. Why do we tell children that the land remembers? Because actions have consequences that echo forward. What we do to the earth, to each other, becomes part of the story that shapes what comes next. The land remembers through the scars we leave or the care we show. The sun broke over the horizon, bathing everything in gold. The questions had lasted for over an hour. Wesley's throat was raw, his mind exhausted from reaching for understanding he'd gathered in fragments over months of conversation. Finally, Adsila stood. Enough, she said. We have heard sufficient answers. She looked at Victor, then back at Wesley. This man has proven he has listened. Whether he truly understands will be determined by the final test. Victor stepped forward, and for the first time, Wesley saw something close to grudging respect in his eyes. But it was mixed with something darker. The realization that his plan to destroy Wesley was failing, and that failure would cost him authority. The third task, Victor said, his voice hard, will determine everything. The entire tribe gathered as Victor explained the final task, his voice carrying across the morning air, each word carefully chosen to wound. The third test is not about knowledge, and he said, it is about sacrifice, about proving that your connection to Sierra is not built on selfishness, but on genuine love. He turned to face Wesley directly. You will be given a choice. You can leave this territory now, unharmed, with supplies and safe passage to the settlement. You will be free to return to your life. Wesley felt a flutter of hope, quickly extinguished by Victor's next words. But if you choose this, Sierra remains here, and she will face consequences for her betrayal of tribal expectations. She will be stripped of her position, her voice in council, her connection to her father's legacy. The camp fell silent. Sierra's face went pale. Or, Victor continued, you can stay and accept binding into this tribe. You will live here under our laws, subject to our judgment. You will give up your life at the settlement, your trade, your connections to your own people. You will become one of us, fully and permanently. If you choose this, Sierra keeps her position and honor. It wasn't a test, it was a trap. Either way, someone lost everything. Wesley looked at Sierra across the circle. Her eyes were wide with horror, already shaking her head silently, begging him to choose freedom. She'd rather lose her position than watch him sacrifice his entire life. But Wesley had already made his choice 8 months ago when he'd married her in secret. He'd made it every time he'd met her in hidden places, every time he'd learned her language and her stories, every time he'd chosen her over the easier path. I stay, Wesley said, his voice clear and unwavering. I accept binding into the tribe. Sierra's face crumpled. No, Wesley, you can't. I can, he said, speaking directly to her now, because a life without you isn't freedom. It's just existing. He turned back to Victor. I'll live by your laws. I'll work under your judgment. I'll prove every single day that I deserve to be here. Victor's expression was unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. So be it. But before the council could respond, Elizabeth stepped forward from the crowd, her young face set with determination. Before this binding is finalized, she said, her voice shaking but firm, I have something to say. Victor's head snapped toward his daughter. This is not the time. It is exactly the time, Elizabeth interrupted, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Because I cannot watch this continue without speaking the truth. She looked at the assembled council. My father said 3 witnesses placed Wesley Harlan at the Western Ridge during the theft. I know who those witnesses were, and I know they lied. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Victor's face went rigid with shock. My father asked Nahele 3 days ago to say he'd seen Wesley near the ridge, Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger. When Nahele agreed, because he has always resented Sierra for rejecting him, my father found 2 others who would lie for him. She met her father's eyes, unflinching despite the fury she saw there. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But watching an innocent man sacrifice everything while staying silent about the truth makes me as guilty as the liars. Adsila stood, her aged frame somehow commanding immediate attention. These are serious accusations against a council leader. They're true, another voice called out. Nahele himself stepped forward, his face twisted with shame. Victor Blackwood told me to say I saw the outsider near the sacred ground. He said it was necessary to protect the tribe from corruption. He looked at Wesley, unable to meet his eyes fully. But I never saw you there, none of us did. The gathering exploded into chaos. Council members were shouting, some at Victor, others demanding order. Sierra pushed through her guards and ran to Wesley, throwing her arms around him, defying protocol. He held her, feeling her shake against him. When the noise finally died down, Adsila spoke with cold authority. Victor Blackwood, you have orchestrated false testimony. You have manipulated tribal law for personal vendetta. You have dishonored your brother's memory and endangered this community's integrity. Victor stood alone now, his supporters backing away. His face showed no remorse, only the bitter anger of someone whose plan had unraveled. I did what I believed necessary to protect our ways. You did what served your pride, Atsila replied, and you will face consequences. The council deliberated briefly, then announced their decision. Victor would be removed from his position of leadership. He would remain in the tribe but would hold no authority. And most significantly, the accusations against Wesley Harlan were declared false and void. But the binding remained. Wesley had chosen it freely, and the council decided to honor that choice, not as punishment, but as recognition that he had proven himself worthy. As the morning sun climbed higher, Sierra stood beside Wesley, her hand finally permitted to hold his openly. But just as the council was about to proceed with the binding ceremony, Adsila raised her hand, silencing everyone. There is something more you should know, she said, her eyes fixed on Wesley. Something that may change everything. The elderly medicine woman stepped into the center of the circle, her weathered face solemn. Many years ago, during the Great War that tore your nation apart, a young Apache warrior was gravely wounded in a skirmish with bluecoats. He was separated from his hunting party, left to die on unfamiliar ground. Wesley felt a chill run through him, though he didn't understand why. This warrior, Atsila continued, was found by a young white soldier, a healer, not a fighter. Despite the danger to himself, this soldier tended the warrior's wounds through the night, using both his own medicine and knowledge he had learned from native peoples. Sierra's hand tightened around Wesley's. When dawn came, the soldier helped the warrior to safety, risking his own life. Before they parted, the warrior asked the soldier's name, but in his pain, he could not remember it later. What he did remember were the soldier's unusual eyes, one blue, one green. Wesley's breath caught in his throat. His hand unconsciously rose to his face, touching the place beneath his right eye where the iris held both colors. That warrior, Atsila said, looking directly at Victor, was you, Victor Blackwood. And this man, she gestured to Wesley, has the same divided eye that you described to me all those years ago. The camp fell completely silent. Victor stared at Wesley, disbelief and recognition warring on his face. Impossible, he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. I was a field surgeon with the Union Army, Wesley said quietly. 19th Massachusetts Regiment. We were scouting near the Arizona border. His mind raced back through the years. I found a man with an arrow wound and a saber slash across his chest. I removed the arrowhead and stitched the wound. I used yarrow and... He paused, remembering. Prickly pear. I used prickly pear pulp to draw out infection. Victor's face had gone ashen. No one knew about the prickly pear, he said, his voice barely audible. I told no one that detail. Elizabeth stepped forward. Father, you once told me that if you ever met the blue-eyed healer again, you would owe him a life debt. You said his medicine saved not just your body, but your spirit. Victor looked from his daughter to Wesley, then to Sierra. For the first time, his composure cracked completely. The proud war chief seemed to age years in moments as the realization of what he had nearly done settled over him. I didn't know, he said finally. I couldn't have known. Or perhaps you did know, Atsila suggested gently. Perhaps some part of you recognized him from the beginning, and that recognition frightened you more than any outsider could. The binding ceremony that followed was unlike any the tribe had seen before. Not a punishment, but a joining. Not forced assimilation, but willing integration. As Wesley and Sierra stood together before the tribe, bowing, their hands joined by a woven cord, the traditional words took on new meaning. Two rivers joining to form one stronger current, the elder spoke, wrapping the cord. Two paths converging to create a new way forward. Sierra's eyes met Wesley's, filled with tears that were no longer of fear, but of overwhelming joy. My father would have been proud of this day, she whispered. As the ceremony concluded and the tribe dispersed, Sierra led Wesley toward a quiet place at the edge of the camp. They stood together, watching the sun climb toward its zenith. What happens now? Wesley asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sierra placed her hand over his heart, then slowly moved it to rest on her abdomen. Now, she said, her eyes holding a secret she had kept even from him until this moment, we build something new. something that belongs to both worlds. Wesley's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. His hand covered hers, feeling the still, flat plane of her stomach where their child grew, a child who would truly walk between worlds, belonging fully to both. Sierra, he breathed, unable to find words for the emotions flooding through him. She smiled, tears sparkling in her eyes. My father once told me that true healing comes not from separation, but from joining what seems impossible to connect. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was right. From the shadow of a nearby dwelling, Adsila watched the young couple, a satisfied smile crossing her lined face. Maka had been right all those years ago when he'd predicted that someday a bridge would form between the worlds. What he hadn't foreseen was that his own daughter would be the one to build it. The medicine woman turned away, leaving the couple to their private joy. There would be challenges ahead, prejudices to overcome, traditions to reconcile, a new path to forge. But for now, in this moment, two worlds had found peace in each other, and perhaps that was healing enough for one day. I'll continue with part 2, 6,000 words, of the story, maintaining the cinematic style, emotional depth, and following the established structure and character development. The binding ceremony had ended hours ago, but its significance still hung in the air, like the lingering scent of sage and cedar. Wesley sat outside Sierra's dwelling, now their dwelling, watching the evening shadows lengthen across the camp. His wrists still bore the red marks from the ropes, a physical reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. Children played in the dusty clearing, occasionally casting curious glances his way. A white man living among them was still a novelty, despite the months he had spent trading with the tribe. But now he was no longer a visitor. He was one of them, at least in name, if not yet in their hearts. Sierra emerged from their dwelling, her hair freshly braided, adorned with small beads that caught the fading sunlight. She lowered herself beside him, her movements careful in a way that made Wesley wonder if she felt unwell. "Are you in pain?" he asked quietly, his physician's instincts surfacing. She shook her head. "No, just aware." Her hand drifted to her stomach in a gesture that had become familiar since her revelation. "There is a life growing inside me. It makes me move differently." Wesley covered her hand with his. The knowledge that he would be a father still felt surreal, a bright future he had never dared imagine after losing so much in the war. "How long have you known?" 2 months, Sierra admitted. "I wanted to tell you, but your uncle was watching," Wesley finished. She nodded, "and I feared what he might do if he knew." Her eyes met his, dark with remembered fear. "He nearly separated us forever, Wesley. If Elizabeth hadn't spoken up." He pulled her gently against him, feeling her tremble slightly. "But she did, and the truth came out." "Not all of it," Sierra whispered. Before Wesley could question her meaning, a shadow fell across them. They looked up to find Adsila standing before them, her weathered face solemn. "The council requests your presence," she said, her gaze focused on Sierra. "Both of you." Wesley helped Sierra to her feet, noting the flash of apprehension that crossed her face. Despite Victor's disgrace, the old fears lingered. What new trial awaited them now? The council lodge was lit by a central fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the faces of the 7 elders seated in their traditional semicircle. The silver-haired man who had presided over Wesley's trial now occupied the center position, Victor's former place. Wesley recognized him as Makia, the eldest of the tribe's spiritual leaders. "Come forward," Makia invited, his voice carrying the weight of authority without Victor's threatening edge. Wesley and Sierra approached the council, standing side by side before the elders. Wesley noted that Victor was absent, perhaps too ashamed to face them after his deception had been exposed. "Sierra, daughter of Makia began, your father was one of our greatest leaders, a man who looked beyond our borders and saw not just danger, but possibility. Before his death, he entrusted certain responsibilities to you. We wish to know if you still intend to honor them." Sierra straightened her shoulders. "My father's vision is still my vision," she said firmly. "His path is still my path." Makia nodded, apparently satisfied with her answer. He turned his attention to Wesley. "Wesley Harland, you have chosen to bind yourself to our tribe. This is not a decision we take lightly, nor should you. There is much you must learn, much you must understand to truly become one of us. I understand, Wesley replied, and I'm willing to learn. Good. Makia gestured to Atsila, who stepped forward holding a worn leather satchel. Because Sierra's work, her father's work, now falls to both of you. Adsila placed the satchel in Sierra's hands. Maka's final writings, she explained. He was documenting our healing knowledge, combining it with wisdom gathered from other tribes, from Mexican healers, even from white doctors like yourself. Sierra's hands trembled as she opened the satchel, revealing a collection of bound journals filled with her father's distinctive handwriting. I knew he was recording our medicine ways, but I didn't know he had gathered so much. Your father believed that healing transcends boundaries, Atsila continued. That knowledge kept separate dies, but knowledge shared grows stronger. She looked at Wesley. That is why he sent Sierra to work with traders like you, not just for commerce, but for exchange of a different kind. Knowledge, Wesley breathed, understanding dawning. That's why she asked so many questions about my medical training. Sierra nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I've been continuing his work, recording our healing ways, learning from you, creating something new. She looked at the council. I was afraid to tell anyone. After my father's death, when Victor took power, Victor saw enemies where Maka saw allies, Makia finished for her. We know we allowed his fear to blind us for too long. The elder's gaze moved between them. But now, perhaps, we have a chance to return to Maka's vision, a chance to create medicine that combines the best of both worlds. Wesley felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was more than just being permitted to live among the Apache. This was a sacred trust, a continuation of work begun by a man he had never met, but whose legacy he now shared through Sierra. There is a sickness spreading through our children, one of the female elders spoke up. 6 have fallen ill in the past week. Our traditional remedies ease their suffering, but do not cure them. The same illness affected the Maxwell child, Wesley realized. High fever, rash across the chest, difficulty breathing. The elder nodded. You have seen this before? Yes, it responds to a combination of willow bark and a particular mold that grows on bread. Wesley turned to Sierra. Similar to the treatment your father documented for winter cough, but with different proportions. Sierra's eyes lit with understanding. The blue-green medicine. My father mentioned it in his writings, but we never found the right type of mold. I have samples at my cabin, Wesley said. If I could retrieve them, you may go at first light, Makia decided. 2 warriors will accompany you. He raised a hand to forestall any protest. Not as guards, but as protection. There are those in the settlement who may not understand your new position among us. Wesley nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the precaution. His sudden disappearance from the settlement would raise questions. Questions that might lead to trouble if certain minds jumped to dangerous conclusions. As the council dismissed them, Sierra clutched the satchel of her father's writings to her chest like a precious child. Outside the lodge, the night had fully descended, stars appearing like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. My father would have liked you, Sierra said softly as they walked back to their dwelling. He would have seen in you what I saw, a man who listens, who respects, who seeks to understand. I wish I could have met him, Wesley replied, thinking of the visionary leader who had set in motion events that would change his life so profoundly. Sierra stopped walking, turning to face him in the starlight. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. Something I haven't told anyone, not even Atsila. Wesley waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to reveal. 3 nights ago, I had a dream, Sierra began, her eyes reflecting the starlight. My father came to me. He stood at the edge of our dwelling, just as real as you are now. He told me that a healing time was coming, but first there would be great pain. Her voice faltered. He said the tribe would face a test that would reveal the truth in people's hearts. Wesley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Do you think that test was what happened with Victor? With my trial? Sierra shook her head slowly. No, I think that was just the beginning. Her hand found his in the darkness. I think the real test is still coming. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Apache camp. Wesley dressed quickly in the half-light, careful not to wake Sierra, who had finally fallen into deep sleep after a restless night. She had tossed and turned beside him, murmuring words he couldn't catch, her dreams clearly troubled. Outside, two warriors waited, solemn-faced men who had been among those guarding him during his trial. They nodded respectfully now, their earlier hostility replaced by cautious acceptance. One of them, a man called Dakota, handed Wesley a water skin and a small pouch of dried meat and corn. For the journey, he explained simply. The ride to Wesley's cabin would take most of the morning. As they set out, the camp was already stirring to life. Women tending cooking fires, children carrying water from the stream, men preparing for the day's hunting. A few called out greetings to Sierra's new husband, testing the words on their tongues like unfamiliar food. The trio rode in silence through the scrubland, following game trails that wound between stands of mesquite and prickly pear. Wesley's mind drifted to the sick children waiting for medicine. The illness he had treated in Sarah Maxwell had been severe, but responded well to his combined treatment of traditional and modern approaches. With Sierra's knowledge of Apache healing practices, they might develop something even more effective. His thoughts were interrupted when Dakota suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to halt. The warrior's head was cocked, listening. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing toward a ridge to their west. 4, maybe 5. Wesley strained his ears, but heard nothing. Still, he trusted the Apache's keen senses. "Settlement patrol?" he suggested. The territorial marshals occasionally rode circuit through these lands. Dakota shook his head. "Move differently, not soldiers." He gestured to a nearby wash, a dry creek bed offering some cover. "We wait. See who passes." They dismounted and led their horses into the natural depression, keeping low. Minutes later, Wesley heard what Dakota had detected much earlier, the rhythmic thud of hooves on hard-packed earth, accompanied by the jingle of tack. 5 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the morning sky. Even from this distance, Wesley could see they were rough-looking men, heavily armed. Not marshals or soldiers, but not simple travelers either. The lead rider paused, scanning the landscape below, then directed his companions down the slope toward the path that would eventually lead to the Apache camp. "Trouble," the second warrior muttered, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Wesley felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Those men were heading directly toward Sierra's people. "We need to warn the camp," he said urgently. Dakota shook his head. "They will not reach our people before midday. We continue to your cabin, get the medicine, then return with warning." His logic was sound. The camp was well defended and the medicine for the sick children was an immediate need. They waited until the riders had disappeared from view before continuing their journey, now moving with greater urgency. Within 2 hours, the familiar outline of Wesley's modest cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods beside a small spring. Wesley felt a strange pang as they approached. This had been his home for 3 years, his refuge after the war, the place where he had begun to heal. Now it looked smaller somehow, more temporary, just a stopping place on a longer journey. Inside, dust had settled on the sparse furnishings, a table, a chair, a narrow bed, shelves lined with books and medical supplies. Wesley moved quickly to a cedar chest in the corner, retrieving several sealed jars containing the carefully cultivated mold he had described to the council. He packed these, along with other medicines and instruments, into his medical bag. As he worked, his gaze fell on a small wooden box on the shelf above his bed. He hesitated, then took it down, opening it to reveal a tarnished brass pocket watch, his father's, carried through 2 wars, its steady ticking a reminder of lives that had come before his own. Wesley slipped the watch into his pocket. Some connections could be carried forward into new beginnings. "Someone has been here," Dakota said suddenly from the doorway, breaking into Wesley's thoughts. The warrior pointed to faint boot prints in the dust that Wesley had missed in his haste. Heart pounding, Wesley quickly scanned the cabin. Nothing seemed disturbed or missing. "Recently?" Dakota crouched, examining the prints. "Yesterday, maybe. One person." He rose, his expression troubled. "We should not linger." Wesley finished gathering what they needed, then took one last look around. There were too many supplies to carry everything of value. He would have to return, perhaps with Sierra, to collect the books and other items worth preserving. As they stepped outside, a distant gunshot cracked the morning stillness. Then another. The sounds came from the direction of the Apache camp. The riders, Wesley breathed, fear clutching at his throat. Dakota's face hardened. We ride now. They mounted quickly, spurring their horses to a gallop, the medical supplies secured in Wesley's saddlebags. The journey that had taken 2 hours at a steady pace now became a desperate race against time, the landscape blurring as they pushed their mounts to their limits. More gunshots echoed across the open country. Then, as they crested a rise that offered a view of the camp in the distance, Wesley saw the rising column of black smoke. Something was burning. Sierra moved among the sick children, placing cool cloths on their foreheads, singing softly to soothe their restless sleep. 6 young ones lay on pallets in Adzila's healing lodge, their skin flushed with fever, their breathing labored. The youngest was just 4 summers old, the oldest barely 10. Since Wesley's departure at dawn, Sierra had spent the morning reviewing her father's journals, searching for any additional insights that might help when Wesley returned with his medicines. The work distracted her from the persistent worry that gnawed at her, the sense that something ominous approached, just as her father had warned in her dream. Adsila entered the lodge carrying a fresh batch of herbal tea. The old woman's face was drawn with fatigue. She had been tending the children through the night. Rest, grandmother, Sierra urged, taking the tea from her hands. I will watch over them. Adsila sank gratefully onto a woven mat. Your father would be proud of you, she said, her voice rough with exhaustion. He always said you had healing hands. Sierra smiled sadly as she helped one of the young girls sip the soothing tea. I wish he had lived to see this day, to see the worlds coming together as he dreamed. He sees, Adsila assured her. The ancestors are always watching. She studied Sierra with knowing eyes. The child you carry, Maka's grandchild, will be a bridge between worlds in ways even your father could not have imagined. Sierra's hand moved to her abdomen. How did you know about the child? I told no one but Wesley. Adzila's weathered face creased in a smile. I have delivered every baby in this camp for 40 years. I know the signs. Her expression grew more serious. But that is not all I see in you, daughter of Maka. You are troubled. The dream still haunts you. Sierra looked away, unwilling to burden the old woman with her fears. It was just a dream. Dreams are messengers, Adsila said firmly, especially for those with the gift. She leaned forward. Tell me what you saw. Before Sierra could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouts of alarm, running feet. One of the young warriors burst into the lodge, his face tight with urgency. Riders approaching from the east, he reported. Armed men, not soldiers. Sierra and Adsila exchanged a glance of alarm. With Victor removed from leadership and many of the strongest warriors accompanying hunting parties, the camp's defenses were weakened. How many? Sierra asked, rising quickly. 5 that we can see. Makia has ordered everyone to prepare. The young man hesitated. They carry torches. Fear sliced through Sierra. Armed riders with fire meant only one thing. They had not come to talk. She thought immediately of Wesley, somewhere between here and his cabin, with only 2 warriors for protection. If he returned now, he would ride straight into danger. Get the children to the caves, Adsila ordered, already moving to gather the sickest of their young patients. They will be safer there. Sierra helped bundle the children onto carrying blankets. As they worked, the first gunshot rang out, followed by shouts and screams from the camp's perimeter. Go now, Adsila urged, handing Sierra one of the makeshift stretchers. Take the western path. I will follow with the others. Sierra hesitated. What about you? The old woman's eyes flashed with a fierce light. I have survived 68 summers, girl. I know when to run and when to stand. Now go! With the help of 2 young women, Sierra carried the sick children away from the lodge, keeping low as more gunshots cracked through the air. Smoke billowed from one of the eastern dwellings where a torch had found its mark. They had nearly reached the edge of the camp when a rider burst through the smoke, his face twisted in a cruel grin beneath a filthy hat. He carried a revolver in one hand, a burning brand in the other, his eyes locked on Sierra and the children. Well, look what we got here, he drawled, leveling his gun at them. Some squaws running with their brats. Sierra pushed the children behind her, facing the rider with a calm she did not feel. These children are sick, she said in clear English. They have done nothing to you. The man's eyes widened slightly at her speech. Got ourselves an educated Injun, he sneered, dismounting slowly. Don't matter none. Boss says clear the camp, and that's what we're gonna do. Boss? Sierra questioned, trying to keep him talking, aware of the young women slowly backing away with the children. Who sent you here? Wouldn't you like to know? He raised the torch, stepping closer. Sierra stood her ground. Judge Hammond, she said, the name falling from her lips like an accusation. He's behind this, isn't he? The man's momentary surprise confirmed her suspicion before he could mask it with another sneer. Smart for a squaw. Judge Hammond's got plans for this territory that don't include Apache filth squatting on valuable land. Says it's for the greater good, progress, and civilization. His eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. He'll be mighty pleased when we tell him we've cleared the way for his, what did he call it, territorial development project. Development, Sierra repeated bitterly. So that's what you call murder these days. The man shrugged. Law's on our side, woman. Judge Hammond signed the papers himself, legal authorization to remove trespassers from railroad land. He chuckled darkly. Didn't specify how they was to be removed, though. Now you can come quiet-like, or you can join your friends over there. He jerked his head toward the burning dwellings. Your choice, squaw. Wouldn't you like to know? He raised the torch, stepping closer. Now you can come quiet-like, or you can join your friends over there. He jerked his head toward the burning dwellings. Your choice, squaw. Sierra's hand moved to the knife concealed at her waist, her father's knife, carried always in remembrance. But before she could draw it, an arrow whistled through the air, burying itself in the man's shoulder. He screamed, dropping the torch, his gun firing wildly as he fell. Elizabeth appeared beside Sierra, already knocking another arrow. Go, she hissed. I'll hold him. Sierra didn't waste time arguing. She turned to follow the others toward the relative safety of the caves. But a movement caught her eye, a familiar figure staggering through the smoke. Adsila, supporting one of the youngest children, her face streaked with soot. Adsila, Sierra called, running to help them. The old woman's face was grim. They are burning the healing lodge, she gasped. All your father's medicines, all our supplies. A second rider appeared through the smoke, bearing down on them fast. Sierra pushed Adsila and the child toward Elizabeth. Run! As the others fled, Sierra stood her ground, finally drawing the knife from her belt. The rider slowed, sizing her up with cold eyes. Where do you think they're running to, girl? He asked, his voice eerily calm compared to his companion's crude threats. We've got men all around this camp. No one's getting out. Sierra felt ice form in her veins. This wasn't just a random attack. It was coordinated, planned. Someone wanted her people gone. Or dead. The man dismounted, drawing a long-bladed knife of his own. Now, we can do this quick, or we can do this slow. Your choice. Sierra backed away, looking for any advantage. Her training had included some defense, but against a larger opponent with greater reach, her options were limited. She feinted to the right, then darted left, trying to circle back toward the others. The man was faster than she expected. His free hand shot out, catching her arm in an iron grip. Nice try, he grunted, raising his knife. Sierra struggled, kicking at his legs, but her strength was no match for his. As the knife began its downward arc, she closed her eyes, her hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. The impact never came. Instead, a sickening thud and the sudden loosening of the man's grip made her eyes fly open. The attacker crumpled to the ground, blood pouring from a wound to his head. Behind him stood Victor Blackwood, holding a war club stained red. Sierra stared in shock. Uncle? Victor's face was a mask of cold fury, but not directed at her. Go, he ordered, scanning the smoke-filled camp. Get to the caves with the others. I will find Elizabeth. But go, he repeated, already turning to face a new threat. Two more riders emerging from the swirling smoke. This is not your fight, child. Live for the future. Something in his words, in the resigned determination of his stance, made Sierra's blood run cold. This was not just the warrior preparing for battle. This was a man preparing for his final stand. Uncle, please. Tell your husband, Victor said, his eyes meeting hers one last time, that my life debt is paid. Before Sierra could respond, he charged toward the approaching riders, his war cry rising above the chaos of the burning camp. Sierra stood frozen for a precious second, torn between staying to help and protecting the life growing within her. Then, with a silent prayer to the ancestors, she turned and ran toward the caves, her father's knife clutched tightly in her hand. Wesley, Dakota, and the second warrior approached the camp with extreme caution, dismounting to move the final distance on foot, using the terrain for cover. The scene that greeted them was one of devastating chaos. At least 3 dwellings burned fiercely, sending columns of black smoke into the sky. Bodies lay scattered across the central clearing, some Apache, others rough-looking white men. An attack, Dakota whispered, his face tight with fury. 5 riders become many. Wesley scanned the burning camp desperately, searching for any sign of Sierra. Fear clawed at his throat, threatening to overwhelm his reason. Where would survivors go? He asked urgently. The caves, the second warrior answered. To the west, if they had warning. Wesley nodded, forcing himself to think past the panic. Then that's where we go. They circled wide around the camp, using a dry wash for cover, working their way toward the western hills, where a series of shallow caves offered natural shelter. As they moved, Wesley spotted 2 riders searching the perimeter of the camp, rifles ready. Whoever had organized this attack was thorough. They were hunting for survivors. Why? Wesley whispered as they paused behind an outcropping of rock. Why attack the camp? There's been peace with the settlement for years. Dakota's eyes were hard. Land, always land. The railroad survey came through last month. White man's hunger never ends. The railroad. Wesley had heard rumors in the settlement about a new spur line being planned, but he'd paid little attention to such matters. Now he wondered if those innocent-seeming surveyors had been the harbingers of this violence. They reached the base of the western hills without being detected. The narrow path leading up to the caves showed signs of recent passage, broken twigs, disturbed stones. Someone had come this way and recently. Wait, the second warrior said suddenly, crouching to examine something on the ground. Blood! Wesley's heart lurched. A small, dark stain marked one of the stones on the path. Fresh blood, not yet fully dried. Sierra, he breathed, fear giving way to desperate determination. We need to move faster. They climbed swiftly, following the path as it wound upward through scrub and stone. At a bend in the trail, they found more blood, a larger stain this time, accompanied by a discarded piece of cloth that Wesley recognized as coming from an Apache dress. Close, Dakota murmured, drawing his knife as they approached the dark mouth of the largest cave. Be ready. Wesley's hand went to the revolver at his hip, a weapon he had carried since the war, but had hoped never to use again. The irony wasn't lost on him. Having just bound himself to a peaceful future with the Apache, he now found himself preparing for violence to protect that future. As they neared the cave entrance, a shadow detached itself from the surrounding rocks. Elizabeth appeared, an arrow nocked and ready, her young face streaked with dirt and blood. Wesley, she gasped, lowering her bow. Thank the spirits. Her eyes moved to the warriors accompanying him. Dakota? Kami? The camp? Burning, Dakota answered grimly. Many dead. Who did this? Men from the settlement, Elizabeth replied, her voice bitter. Led by a man called Ransom. They came with guns and fire, saying the land had been claimed for the railroad. Wesley felt sick. Josiah Ransom was a land speculator who had arrived in the territory 6 months ago, full of grand talk about progress and opportunity. Wesley had treated the man's sprained ankle once, finding him arrogant but not obviously dangerous. Clearly, he had misjudged. Sierra? Wesley asked, dreading the answer. She... Inside, Elizabeth said, gesturing to the cave. She's alive, but... Wesley didn't wait to hear more. He pushed past her into the cool darkness of the cave, his eyes adjusting slowly to the dim light filtering from small fissures in the ceiling. Several figures huddled against the far wall, women and children mostly, some injured, all with the haunted look of those who had seen too much violence in too short a time. And there, kneeling beside a prone figure, was Sierra. Relief flooded through Wesley at the sight of her, followed immediately by concern as he registered what she was doing. She was pressing a cloth against a wound on the old woman's side, her hand stained with blood. Atsila, Wesley breathed, rushing forward. What happened? Sierra looked up, her face transforming with joy and relief at the sight of him. Wesley, You're alive! She reached for him with one blood-stained hand, which he clasped tightly. Atsila was shot as we fled. The bullet went through her side. Wesley knelt beside the elderly medicine woman, who regarded him with pain-glazed eyes but remarkable lucidity. Let me see, he said gently, removing the cloth from the wound. The bullet had entered just above her hip and exited through her back, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. With proper care, she might survive, but she needed more than what they had available in this cave. Your medicines, Sierra said urgently. Did you bring them? Wesley nodded, opening his medical bag. Some. Not everything we need, but enough to stabilize her. His fingers moved with the precision and confidence that had saved countless lives during the war. The combination of conventional medicine and native remedies he'd learned over the years gave him unique tools to address wounds like this. Where modern doctors might rely solely on surgery, Wesley knew plants that could stop bleeding and fight infections simultaneously. As he worked, he recalled Sierra's father's notes about treating gunshot wounds with a poultice of yarrow and juniper ash, knowledge that seemed to flow through his hands now. This is what your father wrote about, he murmured to Sierra as he applied the mixture. The marriage of both worlds' healing wisdom. He looked around the cave, taking stock of the other injured. How many are wounded? 4 seriously, including Atsila, Sierra answered, helping him prepare his instruments. 3 children with minor injuries. The others, her voice faltered. The others didn't make it out of the camp. Wesley worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging Atsila's wound, then moving on to the other injured. As he treated a young warrior with a bullet wound to the shoulder, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since they found the blood on the path. Are you hurt? He asked Sierra, his eyes searching her for any sign of injury. She shook her head. Not me, but... Her voice broke. Victor is dead. He stayed behind to fight so we could escape. He saved my life. Wesley paused in his work, remembering the proud, bitter man who had nearly destroyed him out of fear and wounded pride. The same man who had, in the end, given his life to protect his niece. The debt he had spoken of, a life for a life, had been paid in full. I'm sorry, Wesley said softly, meaning it despite everything Victor had done. He died with honor. Sierra nodded, tears tracking through the dirt on her face. He told me to tell you that his life debt is paid. As night fell, the small group of survivors huddled in the cave, speaking in whispers, tending their wounded, grieving their lost. Wesley and Sierra sat near the entrance, keeping watch while the others tried to rest. What happens now? Sierra asked, her head resting against Wesley's shoulder, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Our home is gone. My father's medicines, his journals, all destroyed. Wesley tightened his arm around her. Not all, he said, reaching into his vest pocket to withdraw a small notebook he had found tucked into his medical bag. Atsila must have placed this there before I left this morning. Sierra took the notebook with trembling hands, recognizing her father's handwriting. The last volume of his journals, the most recent, containing his final thoughts and discoveries. Her fingers traced the familiar patterns of his script, each curve and line a memory of watching him work late into the night by lamplight. Since childhood, she had sat beside him as he documented remedies, combining knowledge from different tribes and settlers alike. Father always said knowledge dies if kept in one place, she whispered, opening to a page where he had sketched a plant with her childish handwriting, labeling parts beside his precise notes. This was the first plant he taught me to identify when I was only 6. A tear fell onto the page as she carefully turned to the final entries. He was writing about us, Wesley, about the future. She read aloud, My Sierra has found one who sees with both eyes, medicine and spirit. Perhaps through them, the healing path I began will continue. Her voice broke. He knew somehow. He knew about us before there was an us. How did she know to save this? Sierra asked, clutching the precious book to her chest. Perhaps the same way she knew about our child, Wesley suggested. Some wisdom goes beyond explanation. Sierra was silent for a long moment, listening to the soft sounds of breathing from the wounded and exhausted refugees. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. My father's dream was of healing between our peoples. And now, look where we are, hiding in caves while our home burns. Bitterness colored her words. Perhaps Victor was right all along. Perhaps some divides can never be crossed. Wesley turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Sierra, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "What happened to A was not the failure of your father's dream. It was the act of men whose hearts hold no room for anything but greed. Men like that exist in both our worlds. And good men die because of them," Sierra replied, thinking of Victor's final stand. "Yes," Wesley agreed soberly, "but good men and women also live to carry on the fight." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, where their child grew. "Your father's dream lives in you, in the work we will continue, in the child we will raise to understand both worlds." "How?" Sierra asked, genuine anguish in her voice. "Where will we go? What will we do?" Wesley had been pondering this question since they had arrived at the cave. "North," he said finally, "to the high country. There are other Apache bands there, ones that have maintained better relations with the territorial government. With Adsila to vouch for us, they might take us in, at least until we can build something of our own." "And the railroad men? Ransom and his kind?" "Justice will find them," Wesley said, more confidence in his voice than he truly felt. "The territorial marshal isn't a man to ignore the massacre of peaceful people." Sierra didn't look convinced, but she nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Tomorrow then," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed despite her efforts to stay alert. "We head north." Wesley gently shifted her weight, encouraging her to rest against him more comfortably. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, he kept his vigil at the cave entrance, watching the distant glow of their burning home against the night sky. His mind turned to the journey ahead, difficult under the best of circumstances, nearly impossible with wounded and children in tow. But they had no choice. To remain here, so close to men who had already demonstrated their murderous intent, would be suicide. From deeper in the cave, Adsila stirred, her aged voice carrying to where Wesley sat. "The circle turns," she murmured, her words clear, despite her weakened state. "Death follows life, follows death. The healing comes after the wound." Wesley turned to look at the old woman, surprised to find her watching him with eyes that seemed to see more than what was before them. "Your father-in-law knew this day would come," Adsila continued. "He saw it in his dreams, just as his daughter sees what is yet to be. The gift passes through the blood." "What did he see?" Wesley asked, drawn into her cryptic words despite his pragmatic nature. "Fire and blood," Adsala replied, her gaze never wavering, "and after a new beginning. But first comes the test that reveals the truth in people's hearts." Sierra's words from the night before echoed in Wesley's mind, her description of her father's warning in her dream. The test that would reveal the truth in people's hearts. Had this attack been that test? Or was something more still to come? As if reading his thoughts, Adsila smiled faintly. "The test is not yet complete, healer. The darkest hour comes before dawn." With those ominous words, she closed her eyes, her breathing settling into the rhythm of sleep. Wesley returned his attention to the night, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. These people, his people now, looked to him for protection, for guidance. Their journey north would test them all in ways he could only begin to imagine. And somewhere out there, men like Ransom still hunted, driven by greed and the certainty of their own righteousness. Men who would not rest until the land was cleared of those they saw as obstacles to progress. As Sierra shifted in her sleep, murmuring something in Apache, Wesley made a silent vow. Whatever came, whatever test awaited, he would stand between his new family and harm. The binding ceremony had made him Apache in name. The events of this day would make him Apache in truth. The night deepened around him, stars appearing one by one in the vast desert sky. In a few hours, dawn would come, bringing with it the beginning of their journey into an uncertain future. But for now, in this moment of fragile peace, Wesley held his sleeping wife and listened to the ancient silence of the land that had become his home. A land worth fighting for, a people worth dying for, a future worth believing in, despite the fires that burned against the night sky. Dawn broke in shades of crimson and gold across the high desert, the beauty of it a stark contrast to the grim circumstances of those who watched it rise. Wesley stood at the mouth of the cave, surveying the rough terrain that stretched before them. Their journey north would be arduous under the best conditions. With wounded to transport and children to protect, it bordered on impossible. Inside the cave, the survivors prepared to leave, 15 in total, including 4 seriously wounded and 5 children. The remaining 6 were mostly women and older men, with only 3 warriors of fighting age among them, hardly a force capable of defending against another attack. Sierra approached, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes clear and determined. She had spent the night tending the wounded alongside Wesley, catching only moments of sleep between treatments. "Atsila is awake," she said quietly. "She wishes to speak with us before we leave." They moved deeper into the cave where the elderly medicine woman lay on a makeshift pallet. Despite Wesley's care, fever had set in during the night, giving her skin an unhealthy sheen. Her breathing was labored, each inhalation a visible struggle. "Come closer," she whispered as they knelt beside her. "Time grows short." Sierra took the old woman's hand, her face tight with worry. "Save your strength, grandmother. We have a long journey ahead." Adsila shook her head slightly. "My journey ends here, child. I have seen it." "No," Sierra protested, gripping the weathered hand more tightly. "We'll carry you. Wesley's medicine cannot change what is written in the stars." Adsila interrupted gently. "Listen to me, both of you. What I must say is more important than one old woman's life." Wesley placed a steadying hand on Sierra's shoulder, feeling her tremble beneath his touch. "We're listening," he said solemnly. Atsila's eyes, though clouded with pain, held a fierce intensity. "The men who attacked our camp, they were not just greedy settlers. They served someone with greater purpose." "Ransom?" Wesley asked, recalling the land speculator Elizabeth had named. "He is but a tool," Atsila replied. "Behind him stands another, a man who has hunted our people for many years, waiting for this moment." She paused, gathering strength. "A man called Hammond, Judge Elijah Hammond." Wesley felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath him. Judge Hammond was one of the most respected men in the territory, a federal judge known for his harsh sentencing of outlaws and his advocacy for civilizing the frontier. His reputation as an Indian fighter dated back to the war. "Hammond orchestrated this?" Wesley asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "We have gold," Edsela whispered, "in the northern hills of our territory. He has known of it 4 years, biding his time until the railroad survey gave him the excuse he needed to clear us from the land." Sierra's eyes widened. "The sacred caves," she breathed. "The ones my father forbade anyone to enter." Adsila nodded weakly. "Maka discovered the gold when he was a young man. He understood what would happen if white men learned of it, so he declared the cave sacred, forbidden. Only he and I knew the truth. Judge Hammond has built his reputation on civilizing the frontier," Wesley said grimly, the pieces falling into place. "But all along it's been about wealth and power." "His power reaches far," Adsila confirmed, her voice growing fainter. "The territorial governor considers him a trusted advisor. Military commanders seek his counsel. Even the marshals defer to his judgment on frontier matters." Her eyes locked with Wesley's. "That is why this danger runs deeper than a few violent settlers. Hammond has spent decades building his influence, cultivating an image of stern justice and progress. Few would question his actions or motives, and fewer still would take the word of Apache survivors over his," Sierra added bitterly. Wesley's mind raced. If Hammond was truly behind the attack, their situation was far more dangerous than he had imagined, and a federal judge had resources, connections, the weight of law behind his actions, or at least the appearance of law. "How did Hammond discover the gold?" he asked. Adsila's gaze shifted to Sierra. "Your cousin, Nahele." After Sierra rejected his proposal, his bitterness festered. He explored the forbidden caves, discovered the gold, and traded the information to Hammond in exchange for promises of wealth and power. Sierra closed her eyes briefly, pain etched across her features. "And Victor? Did he know?" "No," Atsila assured her. "Victor was many things, but he was no traitor. His hatred of outsiders was born of fear, not greed." The old woman's breathing grew more labored. She clutched at Sierra's hand with sudden urgency. "Listen carefully. You must not go north as you planned. Hammond will expect that. His men will be watching the northern trails." Then where? Wesley asked. The settlement is too dangerous. We have wounded who need shelter, children who need food. West, Atsila said, her voice fading. 3 days' journey. A canyon with red walls and a river that runs clear even in summer. There you will find allies, a band of mixed blood, led by a man called Thomas Blackwater. He was Maka's friend in the old days. Sierra looked confused. I've never heard my father speak of this place or this man. Some secrets are kept even from those we love most, Atsila replied. Maka established this refuge years ago, a place for those who walk between worlds. Tell Blackwater that the daughter of Maka comes seeking shelter. Show him this. With trembling hands, she removed a small pouch from around her neck and pressed it into Sierra's palm. The sign of the covenant between them. Sierra opened the pouch, revealing a smooth stone carved with symbols that Wesley didn't recognize. She stared at it in wonder, then carefully secured it around her own neck. Now go, Atsila urged, her voice barely audible. Take our people to safety. We can't leave you, Sierra protested, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. Atsila's lips curved in a faint smile. You are not leaving me, child. I am releasing you. Her gaze shifted to include Wesley, both of you, to fulfill what Maka began. She reached up with surprising strength, placing one hand on Sierra's abdomen. The child you carry is precious beyond knowing. Protect the future, even when it seems darkest. Her hand fell away, her eyes drifting closed. I go to walk with the ancestors, she murmured. Tell them our stories. Keep our medicine alive. Sierra bent to press her forehead against the old woman's, tears falling freely now. Journey well, grandmother, she whispered. We will remember. Wesley stood back, allowing Sierra this moment of farewell. He had seen enough death in his life to recognize its approach, the subtle slowing of breath, the gradual relaxation of features as pain receded. Atsila was slipping away, not in violence, but in the quiet acceptance of one who had lived fully and was ready for what came next. When Sierra finally rose, her face was composed despite the tears. We need to prepare the others, she said, her voice steady. We leave within the hour. Wesley nodded, respecting her strength. As they turned to Koyin, Adsila's voice came once more, so faint they almost missed it. Remember, she breathed, the healing comes after the wound. They were her final words. By the time they reached the cave entrance, Atsila, last of the old medicine women, keeper of ancient knowledge, had joined the ancestors. They buried Atsila at dawn, in the traditional Apache way, wrapped in her finest blanket, medicine pouch clasped in her hands, face turned toward the rising sun. Though the grave was shallow due to limited time and tools, Sierra carefully arranged stones in a protection pattern around it. To keep her spirit safe on its journey, Sierra explained softly, placing the final stone, and to ensure she rests undisturbed. Wesley touched her shoulder gently. We should move soon. It's several hours until nightfall, but we need to put distance between us and this place before dark. Sierra nodded, rising from her kneeling position beside the grave. The other survivors had already begun their descent from the cave, carrying what few supplies they had managed to salvage. Dakota and Elizabeth led the group, scouting the safest path through the rough terrain. West, Sierra said, orienting herself by the sun's position. 3 days to Blackwater's Canyon, if Adsila's directions were accurate. And if we're not intercepted, Wesley added grimly. He checked his revolver again. 6 bullets, plus 12 more in his belt pouch. Not nearly enough if they encountered a large force, but better than nothing. They moved cautiously down from the hills, keeping to dry washes and stands of mesquite that offered some cover. The wounded were carried on travois constructed from branches and blankets, their progress slow but steady. The children, too young to fully understand the danger, required constant reminders to stay quiet. By midday, they had covered perhaps 4 miles, a pitiful distance under normal circumstances, but a minor victory given their condition. They paused in the shade of a sandstone overhang, rationing the meager supply of water they had carried from the cave. We need to find the water by tonight, Elizabeth said, examining their dwindling supplies, the children especially. Wesley nodded, recalling his mental map of the territory. There's a spring about 3 miles west of here, if I remember correctly. Small but reliable even in dry seasons. If Hammond's men haven't found it first, Dakota warned, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They know these lands too. The mention of Hammond reminded Wesley of a crucial fact. We need to get word to the territorial marshal about what happened. Hammond may control the local law, but federal marshals answer to a higher authority. And how do we do that? Elizabeth asked skeptically. We can hardly walk into the settlement to send a telegram. Wesley considered this problem. There's a homestead about a day's ride southwest, the Camerons. Good people who've traded fairly with the Apache for years. If we could get a message to them. Too risky, Dakota cut in. Any white homestead will be watched now. Hammond will make sure his story spreads first. That renegade Apaches attacked settlers, requiring retaliation. Sierra, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. Dakota is right. Our priority must be reaching Blackwater's Canyon. Once we're safe, we can find ways to seek justice. She looked at Wesley, her eyes reflecting the hard truth they both understood. The living come first. They continued westward through the afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly. The wounded suffered most from the heat and jostling movement. Despite Wesley's best efforts to ease their pain with the limited medicines he had brought from his cabin. One of the warriors, shot through the lung during the attack, grew steadily weaker, his breathing more labored with each passing hour. As the shadows lengthened, they spotted a faint smudge of green against the tawny landscape ahead. Vegetation that suggested the presence of the spring Wesley had mentioned. Their relief was short-lived, however, as Dakota, scouting ahead, returned with grim news. "Riders," he reported, dropping to one knee beside Wesley. 4, maybe 5, making camp at the spring. Wesley's heart sank. Hammond's men? Cannot tell from this distance, but they are armed and they have posted guards, not travelers passing through. They retreated to a shallow depression that offered some concealment while they considered their options. The wounded needed water desperately. The children were already showing signs of dehydration. Listless movements, dry lips, dull eyes. "We could circle wide around them," Elizabeth suggested. "Find another water source." "There is no other water for miles in this direction," Sierra pointed out, "and we cannot go back east." Wesley studied the terrain, considering possibilities. If they are Hammond's men, they'll be watching for a large group moving north. They may not expect anyone to approach directly from the east, especially after dark. Dakota nodded slowly, understanding Wesley's implication. A small party might reach the spring undetected, bring water back to the others. "Exactly," Wesley confirmed. "2 of us, moving quietly after nightfall. We fill what containers we have, then withdraw before they know we were there." "And if they do discover you?" Sierra asked, her voice tight with concern. Wesley didn't answer directly, but his hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As dusk settled over the desert, they prepared for the water expedition. Wesley checked his weapon one final time, while Dakota gathered every available container: water skins, medicine bottles, even a small cooking pot salvaged from the camp. Sierra pulled Wesley aside before he departed, her face pale in the fading light. "Be careful," she whispered, pressing something into his palm. "Take this." Wesley looked down to find a small leather pouch, similar to the one Atsila had given Sierra. "What is it?" "Protection," Sierra answered simply. "My father carried it through many dangers." Her fingers lingered on his hand. "Come back to us, Wesley. To me." He tucked the pouch into his shirt, close to his heart, then drew her into a brief, fierce embrace. "I will," he promised. "Wait for my signal before bringing the others forward." With a final nod to Dakota, who carried a bow rather than a firearm for its silence, Wesley began the cautious approach toward the spring. They moved from shadow to shadow, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. The quarter moon cast just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to easily reveal their presence to watchful eyes. As they drew closer, the voices of the men at the spring became audible. Rough laughter, the clink of metal against metal, the occasional whinny of a horse. Wesley counted 5 distinct voices, confirming Dakota's estimate. They paused behind a large boulder about 50 yards from the spring. From this vantage point, Wesley could make out the layout of the camp. 4 men seated around a small fire, while a 5th stood watch on the opposite side. The horses were picketed nearby, their silhouettes distinct against the starlit sky. Wesley gestured to Dakota, indicating they should circle around to approach the spring from behind the sentry. The Apache nodded, understanding the plan without words. They would need to neutralize the guards silently before collecting water or risk discovery. They worked their way round the perimeter of the camp, using the natural contours of the land for concealment. As they drew closer to the lone sentry, Wesley could make out his features in the moonlight. A young man, barely out of his teens, rifle cradled carelessly in the crook of his arm as he gazed up at the stars. Wesley felt a pang of regret for what might become necessary. This was someone's son, perhaps not even fully aware of the larger game being played by men like Hammond and Ransom. But behind Wesley waited children and wounded who would die without water. The moral calculus was clear, if bitter. Dakota touched Wesley's arm, then pointed to himself and mimicked a circling motion. He would approach the sentry from behind while Wesley remained in position to intervene if needed. The Apache moved like a shadow, his progress imperceptible, even to Wesley who knew where to look. One moment he was crouching beside Wesley, the next he was directly behind the young guard, rising from the darkness like a spirit. The takedown was swift and silent. Dakota's arm locked around the sentry's throat, cutting off both air and sound. The rifle clattered softly to the ground as the young man struggled briefly, then went limp. Dakota lowered him gently, checking to ensure he was merely unconscious rather than dead. Wesley moved forward quickly, bringing their containers. The spring bubbled up from between rocks, forming a small pool before trickling away into the desert soil. They worked rapidly, filling each vessel to capacity, the quiet gurgle of water masking any small sounds they might make. As Wesley secured the last container, a voice called from the direction of the campfire. "Riley, everything all right over there?" Dakota and Wesley froze, exchanging a glance of alarm. The unconscious sentry, Riley apparently, gave no response. "Riley," the voice came again, more insistent. "Answer me, boy." The sound of approaching footsteps galvanized them into action. Gathering the filled containers, they began a hasty retreat, keeping low to the ground. They had barely made it 20 yards when a shout of alarm rang out. "Riley's down! We got company!" A rifle shot cracked through the night, the bullet kicking up dirt several feet to Wesley's right. Another followed, closer this time. "Run!" Wesley hissed, abandoning stealth for speed. "Get the water to the others." Dakota hesitated only briefly before accepting the logic. He was faster, knew the terrain better, and carried most of the water. He disappeared into the darkness, heading toward where the rest of their group waited. Wesley changed direction slightly, hoping to draw pursuit away from Dakota's escape route. It worked too well. Two riders appeared on his flank, cutting off his planned route back to Sierra and the others. "There he is," one shouted. "Cut him off." Wesley veered again, heading for a jumble of boulders that might offer some protection. A bullet whined past his ear, close enough that he felt the disturbance in the air. He ducked instinctively, nearly losing his footing on the loose soil. Reaching the boulders, he wedged himself into a narrow gap, drawing his revolver. The riders circled at a distance, unwilling to approach directly in the uncertain light. "Nowhere to run now, Apache lover," one called. "Come on out, and we'll make it quick." Wesley remained silent, conserving his breath and considering his options. They were severely limited. He was outnumbered, cut off from his companions, with minimal ammunition and only a small water bottle for supplies. If he stayed hidden, they would simply wait for daylight, when his position would become untenable. The riders conferred briefly, then one dismounted, approaching the boulders with rifle raised, while his companion provided covering fire from horseback. It was a sound tactical approach, one that Wesley himself might have employed in his military days. As the man drew closer, Wesley caught a glimpse of his face in the moonlight. With a jolt of recognition, he realized it was Josiah Ransom himself, the land speculator who had orchestrated the attack on the Apache camp. The man's expensive coat was incongruous in the wilderness setting, but the rifle in his hands was all business. "I know you're in there, Harlan," Ransom called, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Hammond said you might cause trouble. Should have known an Injun lover like you wouldn't have the sense to stay out of this." Wesley remained silent, adjusting his grip on his revolver. 6 shots against multiple opponents weren't good odds, but he'd faced worse during the war. "Nothing to say?" Ransom continued, moving closer. "That's all right. Hammond will be pleased to hear you've been dealt with. One less loose end to worry about. The mention of Hammond confirmed Edzilla's claims. This wasn't just about land or even the railroad. It was about gold and a federal judge willing to orchestrate murder to obtain it. Ransom was now less than 20 feet from Wesley's position, close enough that a shot would be hard to miss. Wesley raised his revolver, sighting along the barrel, his finger tightening on the trigger. A whisper of movement to his left made him hesitate. Something or someone was approaching from the side, using the boulders for cover, just as he was. Friend or foe, he couldn't tell in the darkness. The question was answered a moment later when an arrow whistled through the night, finding its mark in Ransom's shoulder. The land speculator screamed, dropping his rifle as he stumbled backward. "Ambush!" the mounted man shouted, firing wildly toward the source of the arrow. A second arrow followed the first, missing the rider but striking his horse. The animal reared in panic, throwing its rider before bolting into the darkness. Wesley seized the opportunity, breaking from cover to dash toward the fallen man's rifle. He reached it just as Ransom, despite his wound, lunged for the same weapon. They collided, grappling in the dust. Ransom's blood slicked between them as the arrow in his shoulder snapped from the impact. Ransom was larger, but Wesley had the desperation of a man fighting for more than his own life. He drove his fist into the arrow wound, earning a howl of agony from Ransom, who reflexively released his grip on the rifle. Wesley rolled away, coming up with the weapon just as the second man, recovered from his fall, drew a revolver from his belt. Two shots rang out almost simultaneously. Wesley felt the burn of a bullet grazing his side, even as his own shot caught the man squarely in the chest. The man staggered backward, a look of surprise replacing the hate on his face, then collapsed without another sound. Ransom, seeing his companion fall, scrambled to his feet and lurched toward the horses that remained. Wesley swung the rifle around, but before he could fire, another arrow found its mark, burying itself in Ransom's back. The land speculator pitched forward, twitched once, and lay still. From the shadows, Elizabeth emerged. Another arrow knocked and ready. "I thought you might need help," she said simply. Wesley lowered the rifle, his side burning where the bullet had grazed him. "The others?" "Safe for now. Dakota reached us with the water." She approached Ransom's body cautiously, confirming he was dead before retrieving her arrows. "We should go. The shots will bring the others from their camp." Wesley nodded, gathering the rifle and as much ammunition as he could quickly find. They moved swiftly back toward where Sierra and the others waited, the sound of pursuing riders fading behind them as they used the boulder field to mask their trail. Sierra rushed to meet them as they approached the temporary camp, her face tight with worry that transformed to relief when she saw Wesley. That relief changed to alarm when she noticed the blood staining his shirt. "It's just a graze," he assured her as she helped him sit. "Looks worse than it is." While Sierra cleaned and bandaged his wound, Wesley briefed the others on what they had learned. Ransom confirmed that Hammond is behind the attacks. This isn't just about clearing Apache from railroad land. They're after gold in the sacred caves. Dakota's expression darkened. The forbidden places. Now we know why Maka declared them off-limits. "And why we need to reach Blackwater's Canyon as quickly as possible," Sierra added, tying off Wesley's bandage with practiced hands. "Hammond won't stop with the camp. He'll hunt down any survivors who might reveal the truth." Elizabeth, who had been keeping watch at the perimeter, returned with urgent news. "More riders coming from the east, at least 8, maybe more." Wesley struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. They must have sent word back to the settlement when they found the camp destroyed. He looked at the vulnerable group, wounded warriors, exhausted women, frightened children. "We can't outrun them, not with the wounded." "Then we split up," Sierra said decisively. "The strongest can move faster with the children. The wounded," her voice faltered, "the wounded will slow any pursuit," Dakota finished for her, his face grim but resolved. "I will stay with them." "No," Wesley objected. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Elizabeth said quietly. "Not if we want the children to survive." She straightened her shoulders, a gesture that reminded Wesley painfully of her father. "I'll stay with Dakota and the wounded. We'll lead the pursuit away from your trail to the canyon." Sierra's eyes filled with tears. "Elizabeth, no." "It's what my father would have done," the young woman replied, her voice steady despite her youth. "Let my choice mean something, as his did. There was no time for further debate. The sound of approaching riders grew louder with each passing minute. Hurried farewells were exchanged as they divided their meager supplies. The strongest women took charge of the children, while Sierra gathered the essential medicines. 3 days west, Dakota reminded Wesley as they clasped hands in farewell. Look for the red canyon walls and the clear river. May the ancestors guide your path. And yours, Wesley replied, knowing it might be the last time he saw the proud warrior alive. As they prepared to part, Wesley pulled Elizabeth aside. Head southeast, he advised quietly. There's a marshal's outpost at Fort McLean, about 2 days' hard ride. If you can reach it, tell them what happened. Marshal Collins is a good man. He won't side with Hammond without evidence. Elizabeth nodded, memorizing the information. We'll try, but our first duty is to lead them away from you. Wesley clasped her shoulder, seeing in this young woman the same fierce determination he had come to admire in her father, despite their differences. Victor would be proud of you today. A brief smile touched her lips. Perhaps. Now go. Save my cousin and the little one she carries. They separated under the cold light of the stars, one group heading west toward the promise of sanctuary, the other southeast, drawing the pursuers away from those they sought to protect. As Wesley helped Sierra over a rocky escarpment, he cast one last glance back at the diminishing figures of Dakota and Elizabeth, standing tall as they prepared for what might be their final stand. Will they survive? Sierra asked softly, following his gaze. Wesley couldn't bring himself to offer false hope. They'll do what they must, he answered. As must we. The next 2 days passed in a blur of endless walking, brief rests, and constant vigilance. Their small group, Sierra, Wesley, and 7 others, including 3 children, moved as quickly as their diminishing strength allowed. Water remained their greatest concern, each sip rationed carefully against the relentless desert heat. By the end of the second day, Sierra began to show signs of strain. The pregnancy, combined with grief and exhaustion, left her pale and occasionally unsteady on her feet. Wesley stayed close beside her, supporting her when needed, his own wound a constant reminder of how precarious their situation remained. We should reach the canyon by midday tomorrow, he encouraged, as they made camp for the night in the shelter of a dry wash. If Adsila's directions were accurate, Sierra nodded wearily, accepting the small portion of jerky he offered. If this Thomas Blackwater still lives, if he honors the covenant with my father. Her hand went to the stone pendant Adsila had given her. So many ifs between us and safety. Wesley couldn't argue with her assessment. Their survival hung by the thinnest of threads, each hour bringing new challenges. A child's fever, dwindling supplies, the constant fear of pursuit. Yet somehow they had made it this far, guided by hope and desperation in equal measure. As Sierra drifted into exhausted sleep beside him, Wesley kept watch, studying the night sky with its familiar constellations. The stars had guided him through the war, across the vast western territories, and now, perhaps, to a sanctuary none of them had known existed until Adsila's revelation. Maka had been a visionary, he reflected, establishing a refuge for those who walked between worlds years before such a thing seemed necessary. Had he foreseen this moment, this desperate flight toward a promise of safety? Dawn came too quickly, rousing aching bodies to another day of travel. They set out as the eastern sky paled, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before the full heat of the day descended. The landscape had subtly changed overnight, the flat desert giving way to more varied terrain, arroyos cutting through the earth, occasional stands of juniper providing brief moments of shade. By mid-morning, Wesley spotted a promising sign, a formation of reddish stone jutting from the earth like a signpost. We're getting close, he told Sierra, who walked beside him, one hand resting on her abdomen in an unconscious gesture of protection. The rock is changing color. She nodded, too tired for words but determined to continue. The others followed behind, the children unusually quiet, sensing the importance of this final push toward safety. They crested a low rise just as the sun reached its zenith. Below them, the landscape opened up dramatically, a wide canyon carved by ancient waters, its walls glowing crimson in the midday light. A ribbon of green marked the course of a small river that flowed along the canyon floor, a miracle of life in the parched landscape. The Red Canyon, Sierra breathed, new energy infusing her voice. Atsila was right. They descended carefully toward the canyon rim, searching for a path down to the river below. As they neared the edge, Wesley suddenly raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. His years in the war had honed instincts that now prickled with warning. "We're being watched," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the seemingly empty terrain. Sierra followed his gaze, seeing nothing but rock and sparse vegetation. "Are you certain?" Before Wesley could answer, a voice called from behind a nearby boulder. "That's far enough, strangers." The speaker emerged slowly. A man of middle years, his heritage clearly mixed, with the darker skin of native ancestry, but the full beard of his European forebears. He held a rifle with a practiced ease, not quite pointed at them, but ready to be raised if needed. Behind him, several other armed men appeared, effectively surrounding Wesley's small group. "We mean no harm," Wesley said clearly, keeping his hands visible. "We seek Thomas Blackwater." The man studied them carefully, taking in their exhausted state, the presence of children, Sierra's obvious pregnancy. "What business do you have with Blackwater?" Sierra stepped forward, drawing the stone pendant from beneath her dress. "I am Sierra, daughter of Maka of the Chiricahua Apache. I come seeking shelter under the covenant between my father and Thomas Blackwater." The man's expression changed at the sight of the carved stone, surprise replacing suspicion. He lowered his rifle slightly, approaching to examine the pendant more closely. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice less hostile but still wary. "From Adsila, our medicine woman, before she died," Sierra answered. "Our camp was attacked 3 days ago by men seeking gold in our sacred caves. We are all that remain." The man exchanged glances with his companions, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he shouldered his rifle and extended his hand to Sierra. "I am Thomas Blackwater," he said simply. "Maka was my brother in all but blood. His covenant holds." Relief washed over Sierra's face, so profound that for a moment Wesley feared she might collapse. He moved quickly to support her, his arm around her waist. "She needs rest," he told Blackwater. "We all do. We've been traveling for 3 days with minimal supplies." Blackwater nodded, gesturing to his men. "Bring them down to the settlement, carefully with the children." His gaze lingered on Sierra. "Maka's daughter will have our best dwelling." They followed Blackwater's men down a narrow trail that zigzagged to the canyon floor. As they descended, the settlement came into view, a harmonious blend of cultures that took Wesley's breath away. Traditional native dwellings stood alongside structures built in European style, while gardens of food and medicine flourished near the river. Children of visibly mixed heritage played together, watched by women who paused their work to observe the newcomers. "Welcome to Harmony," Blackwater said as they reached level ground. 20 years of peaceful coexistence, hidden from those who would destroy it. Sierra looked around with wonder, despite her exhaustion. "My father never mentioned this place." "He protected our secret, as we protected his," Blackwater explained. "Knowledge of Harmony's existence would endanger us all. Only those who truly need sanctuary find their way here." They were led to a comfortable dwelling near the river, where food and water awaited. Clean bedding had been hastily arranged, and a woman with the bearing of a healer examined the children for signs of illness or injury. Once the immediate needs of his group had been addressed, Wesley sought out Blackwater, finding him at a small council house near the center of the settlement. The man was conferring with several elders, but he broke off their discussion when Wesley entered. "Your people are settled?" Blackwater asked. Wesley nodded. "Thank you for your hospitality, but there are others we left behind, wounded warriors and 2 companions who stayed to lead pursuers away from our trail. If they live, they may need help." Blackwater's expression grew serious. "Tell me everything." Wesley recounted the attack on the Apache camp, Hammond's role in the violence, the desperate journey west, and the sacrifice of Dakota and Elizabeth. As he spoke, Blackwater's face darkened with anger. "Hammond," he spat when Wesley finished. "We know of him. His hand has been behind many unfortunate incidents with native peoples across the territory." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "If he's after gold in the sacred caves, he won't stop until he has it, or until someone stops him." "I sent Elizabeth and Dakota toward Fort McLean," Wesley said. "If they reach Marshal Collins—" "A good man," Blackwater interrupted, surprising Wesley. One of the few lawmen who can't be bought, but reaching him won't be easy if Hammond's men are pursuing. Then we need to send help, Wesley insisted. Elizabeth is just a girl, and Dakota, brave as he is, can't hold off a large force alone. Blackwater studied Wesley with new interest. You care deeply for these people who are not your blood. They are my people now, Wesley replied simply. I bound myself to the tribe before the attack. Sierra is my wife. Blackwater studied him thoughtfully. You were a field surgeon in the war, Sierra mentioned. A healer who walks between worlds. Wesley nodded. Medicine is my calling. During the war, I saw how inadequate our treatments often were. After I began studying native healing practices, first out of curiosity, then with growing respect. The Apache understand plants and healing rituals we've barely begun to comprehend. He touched the medicine bag at his side. What I carry now is neither purely white medicine nor purely Apache. It's something new, something better. Understanding dawned in Blackwater's eyes. So Maka's vision continues. He always believed the future lay in joining, not separation. He rose decisively. I'll send riders immediately. If your friends live, we'll find them. Relief washed over Wesley, though he knew the chances of finding Elizabeth and Dakota alive were slim. Still, they deserved the attempt after their sacrifice. As he turned to leave, Blackwater stopped him with a hand on his arm. One more thing, Harlan. This sanctuary exists because it remains secret. Those who find us either stay or leave with a vow of silence. Wesley met the man's gaze steadily. I understand, but Hammond must be stopped. He orchestrated the murder of innocent people for gold. Justice and vengeance are different paths, Blackwater warned. Choose carefully which you follow. I choose justice, Wesley assured him, but for that, the truth must be told. Blackwater nodded slowly. Rest now, heal. When the time comes for decisions, we will counsel together. A slight smile touched his lips. Maka would expect no less for his daughter and her chosen one. Wesley returned to find Sierra awake and looking stronger after food and rest. She sat by the dwelling's small window, gazing out at the river that flowed past the settlement. Blackwater is sending riders to look for Elizabeth and Dakota, he told her as he sat beside her. There's a chance they made it to Fort McLean. Hope flickered in Sierra's eyes. And if they did? Then Hammond will face justice for what he's done, Wesley said, taking her hand in his. But it won't bring back those we lost. Sierra was silent for a long moment, her free hand moving to the slight curve of her abdomen. No, but it might give meaning to their sacrifice. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting both grief and determination. My father believed that true healing could only come through understanding between our peoples, not erasing differences, but honoring them while recognizing our shared humanity. As she spoke, Sierra's posture shifted subtly, taking on the dignified bearing Wesley had seen in the drawings of Maka that hung in her dwelling. Even her voice seemed to carry the same measured cadence he'd heard described by elders when they quoted her father's speeches. When I was 12, she continued, my father took me to a meeting with territorial officials. After, he told me, Sierra, they think our medicine is superstition and we think theirs is cruel. Both are wrong because both are incomplete. He spent his life trying to prove that divided knowledge is half knowledge. She reached for her father's journal, opening it to a passage with a pressed flower between the pages. He collected these from every place he went, a living record of the land's medicine. I've done the same since I was old enough to walk. From her pocket, she drew a small, folded packet of leaves. Even during our escape, I gathered these. The healing work never stops. Blackwater has created that here, Wesley observed, gesturing to the thriving community visible through the window. In hiding, Sierra pointed out, her father's determination evident in the set of her jaw. Hidden away in a canyon because the world above cannot accept such a place. Her grip on his hand tightened. That isn't enough, Wesley. Our child deserves to walk in both worlds openly, proudly, carrying forward my father's vision. Our vision now. Wesley recognized the fire in her eyes, the same vision that had driven her father now passing to the next generation. What would you have us do? He asked softly. Heal, she said simply, recover our strength, and then continue what my father began, gathering the medicine knowledge of both worlds, creating something new that serves all people. Her gaze turned toward the river again, but not hidden away, not in shame or fear. Wesley understood then that their journey was far from over. Blackwater's canyon offered sanctuary, but not a final destination. Like the river that had carved this place over countless years, they would eventually find their path back into the wider world, carrying with them the lessons learned in blood and sacrifice. Together, he promised, his hand joining hers over the new life they had created. Whatever comes next, we face it together. As the sun began its descent toward the canyon rim, painting the red walls with deepening hues of crimson and gold, Wesley thought of Adsila's final words. The healing comes after the wound. They had been wounded deeply, their people scattered, their home destroyed, their friends either dead or in grave danger. But in this hidden valley with its improbable union of cultures and traditions, perhaps healing had already begun. And with healing would come strength. Strength to face Hammond and his kind. Strength to build a world where their child could walk freely between the heritage of its parents. Strength to fulfill the vision that had cost Maka his life, but lived on in his daughter. Outside, the people of Harmony went about their evening tasks, lighting cooking fires, tending gardens, children being called home for the night. A community born of necessity but thriving through choice. Proof that what Sierra and Wesley dreamed was possible, if difficult to achieve. Rest now, Wesley urged, seeing the fatigue return to Sierra's features despite her determined words. Tomorrow is soon enough to plan our next steps. She nodded, allowing him to help her to the comfortable pallet that had been prepared. As she drifted towards sleep, her fingers intertwined with his, she murmured, "My father would have liked you." "You said that before," Wesley reminded her with a gentle smile. "It bears repeating," Sierra replied, her eyes closing. "Some truths do." Wesley sat beside her until her breathing deepened into sleep, then moved to the doorway of their dwelling. The canyon was quiet now, the day's activities giving way to the peace of evening. Somewhere out there, Elizabeth and Dakota might still be fighting for their lives. Hammond and his conspirators still plotted their next moves. Challenges awaited that would test them all. But here, in this moment, there was sanctuary, a pause between the wound and the healing, a space to gather strength for what lay ahead. Wesley looked up at the sliver of sky visible between the canyon walls where the first stars had begun to appear. The same stars that had guided him through war and peace, through loss and love, now watched over this unlikely refuge and the even more unlikely family he had found. "Watch over them all," he whispered to the ancient light, "those who journey and those who wait, those who stand in battle and those who build in peace." The stars offered no answer, but in the gentle flow of the river and the soft breathing of his sleeping wife, Wesley found hope enough for one more day. 3 months passed in the sanctuary of Harmony. Wesley and Sierra established a small healing lodge near the river, combining their knowledge to treat both the canyon's inhabitants and occasional travelers who found their way to the hidden community. Their first major success came when they developed a treatment for the children's fever that had plagued both settlements, using a combination of Sierra's father's herbal preparations and Wesley's medical training. Word of their healing work spread carefully through whispered channels, reaching those who needed help most. One crisp morning, as Wesley sorted dried herbs in their dwelling, a rider arrived at Harmony's gates. Dakota, thinner but alive, dismounted wearily from his horse. Wesley rushed to embrace the warrior, scarcely believing his eyes. "Elizabeth?" he asked, fearing the worst. "Alive," Dakota confirmed with a rare smile. "She reached Marshal Collins at Fort McLean. She speaks now to a federal investigator in Tucson." That evening, the council gathered to hear Dakota's full report. Elizabeth had not only survived but thrived in her new role as a witness to Hammond's crimes. With Marshal Collins's protection, she had presented evidence of the judge's conspiracy, documents found on Ransom's body, testimony from sympathetic settlers, and her own witnessed account of the massacre. "Hammond has been suspended from the bench pending investigation," Dakota explained. "His assets frozen, his movements restricted. The territorial governor himself has taken interest in the case." Sierra leaned forward, one hand resting on her now prominent belly. "And the sacred caves, our land?" "Protected for now," Blackwater answered. "The territorial government has declared the area restricted until ownership claims can be properly assessed. No mining will happen there without Apache consent. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could bring back those they'd lost. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which to build. When Sierra's time came, in the deepening days of autumn, Wesley stayed by her side through the long night of labor. Blackwater's wife, an experienced midwife, guided them both with calm certainty. As dawn broke over the canyon walls, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed against the red stone. They named her Adsila Maka Harland, carrying the names of those who had made their union possible. Her skin was lighter than her mother's, but darker than her father's. Her eyes dark like Sierra's, but with flecks of Wesley's unusual green-blue around the pupils. Perfect in her uniqueness, a living bridge between worlds. A week later, they held a small ceremony by the river. Wesley and Sierra stood together, their daughter cradled between them, as Blackwater spoke words of blessing in three languages: Apache, English, and Spanish. The assembled community, people of mixed heritage who had found their own path between cultures, nodded in recognition of the truth being honored. As the ceremony concluded, Sierra stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly over the gentle murmur of the river. My father believed that healing comes not from separation, but from joining what seems impossible to connect, she said, looking down at her daughter's sleeping face. We will carry his work forward, not hidden in canyons, but in the open lands where all can benefit. Blackwater nodded solemnly. When the time is right, harmony will support you. Judge Hammond will not be the last to threaten our kind of peace, but neither will Maka be the last to envision a better way. That night, with their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, Wesley and Sierra spoke in quiet voices of the future. Not just survival, but a life of purpose. They would continue gathering medical knowledge, creating treatments that drew from both traditions. When the time was right, they would establish a place, not quite a settlement, not quite a trading post, where people from both worlds could come for healing. Hammond's downfall has created an opening, Wesley observed. A chance for something new to take root. Sierra smiled, tracing their daughter's perfect profile with a gentle finger. The true healing, she whispered, has already begun. Wesley took her hand, their fingers intertwining above their sleeping child. In that moment, the vow between worlds was renewed, not just between husband and wife, but between past and future, between loss and hope, between wound and healing. The stars continued their ancient dance above the canyon, witnesses to this small beginning. But unlike generations before, this child would not have to choose between worlds or hide her heritage. She would walk proudly in both, carrying forward the vision that had been purchased with blood and sacrifice, and now blossomed in new life. The healing had indeed come after the wound, and it was only the beginning.